Hello and welcome to Thursday Thoughts. Thursday Thoughts? What on earth are they, I hear you ask? Well, my friend Lucy and I meet every week over on Instagram to talk all things personal growth because she is as obsessed with it as I am. And we decided that we might as well put those conversations out as a weekly podcast. So now you can listen to us chat here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll be talking about topics such as spirituality, limiting beliefs, the ego, imposter syndrome, gratitude, meditation, confidence, and so much more. So if you're ready, here we go. So what did we? Well, I think we were thinking about. Well, I was thinking about. We could perhaps talk about how we respond to situations, how we react to situations, and I think those two words are key here. So how we respond, how we react, because although they seem very similar and they have a similar meaning, actually there is a real difference in how in them. So basically, I think a lot of us, and this came up for me because when I was flying here to South Africa on at the weekend, it was a really, really long overnight flight from the UK, and we stopped off in Johannesburg, and then we had to get an interconnecting flight from Johannesburg to George to closer to where we are now. And it was meant to be quite straightforward. We were meant to have enough time. But anyway, there were huge queues in customs. There were huge queues to pick up our luggage. We then had to recheck in our luggage. We basically were told we probably wouldn't make it. Our luggage probably wouldn't make it to the interconnecting flight. And it was, it was highly stressful. And particularly when you've kind of come off a night flight and you haven't had much sleep. And I just thought it was so fascinating because a lot of it was out of our control. We kind of asked if we could jump the queue, and it was very clear that we weren't going to be able to do that. And we weren't the only people in this situation. There were a few others who were doing the same thing as us. And I very much was like, and my sister, there were moments where our heart started, when your heart starts to race, you're like, oh my God, are we going to make that flight? And you start feeling a little bit agitated. But actually, it was very much like, well, we can't actually do anything. We have kind of almost got to surrender to the situation. What will be, will be. And is it going to serve us in any way at all to start panicking, start kind of feeling really tense, that, it's just going to make and aggravate that situation. Yeah. But around us, particularly, there was this poor woman who was there. She just wasn't coping. She was a nervous wreck. There were tears. She really was struggling. There's this other poor guy who was on his own. He was just in front of us, and he really wasn't coping. It's highly stressful if you kind of, you want to get on this plane. You don't know where you're going to stay. It might cost more money if you've got to stay over. Blah 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 blah. So it just made me really realise that we know this. We have a choice in these situations. We have a choice. We can either choose how we respond and make that choice. And as my sister and I kind of did, it was very much we resigned to the fact that we're going to get on the flight or we're not, and our luggage is going to arrive or not. Thankfully, it was all absolutely fine. Or you react and you think the worst and you get yourself in a right old state, and it's a really horrible, miserable, stressful situation, but with the same outcome as anyway. And it's not really, it's the way that we're made, because if you think about it, that stress response in those sorts of situations, which is driven by our amygdala the old part of our brain, was there to keep us safe. It's to kind of like, it switches that stress response on, which basically means that you don't have moments or times to think about your reaction. If you were in the Serengeti desert and you were being chased, you don't want to be pondering over your reaction. You want to just react, and in that moment. So that's why we tend to sometimes snap, or we react in the way that we do. But actually, because the way we've evolved, sometimes we haven't kind of quite caught up yet with the way that now we've kind of got that prefrontal cortex part of our brain now, where we're able to kind of mull things over. We've kind of got more time, and actually we can choose how we respond. It's about being able to access that. And if your nervous system is at full capacity, and you really haven't got any awareness about any of this, then you're most likely to react, and you're going to react in a way which is probably negative, which is going to be unpleasant. You might snap, you might say something in other situations, that's when we say things we regret. So really, I suppose this, I just wanted to bring this up because it is possible to train that reaction with various tools, which we can talk about, various tools we can train ourselves to actually have that moment. And it can sometimes be just a split second, that moment to pause, so that we're not flying off the handle, or we're not, saying something we regret, and actually make a choice to react.
Completely. I mean, you've put it so well, and it's interesting because when I look at myself and my life, I have, until the last 3-4 years, I was always super reactive. Always. It was just kind of like, part of my personality, that I was just a bit feisty and a bit reactive. But actually, as I have been doing this inner work that you and I have been doing for however many years, it has completely enabled me to do exactly what you were just talking about, which is to take a moment and to respond instead of react. And I think what it actually comes down to is something very, very, very simple. But I'm sure people are like, oh yeah, I know. But are we actually doing anything about it? And that is, there is one thing that we have control over in life, and it's ourselves. It is our thoughts, our mind, and the way that we do things. That is literally the only thing that we know that we have full control over. That's it. So if we know that, then when you become really aware of that, and when you actually really, really take that on board, it becomes much easier, I think, in those situations. And the flight example is a perfect example of this. I always use the example of being stuck in traffic. I used to be that girl who would get stuck in a traffic jam and be sitting behind the wheel going, oh my God, like freaking out, like, oh my God, I'm going to be late and this and whatever. And it is completely futile, because just like you said, it's the same outcome. It's literally going to be the same outcome. And actually, I say that often it is a better outcome when you respond instead of react, because you never know what might happen if you respond instead of react, because you might strike up a really nice conversation with a flight attendant, or you know what I mean? The outcome is either going to be the same, or it's going to be better if you respond rather than react. And so yeah, I think that's the first thing that is really, really key here. And I have to say, I don't know whether you know much about the Stoics, but I've been following a guy called Ryan Holiday for quite a long time, and he is very much into Stoicism and Stoic philosophy, which I find absolutely fascinating. I've read books by him. He's got a book called Ego is the Enemy. He's written loads of books, and he has a podcast. Anyway, one of the things that the Stoics talk about is such a great philosophy. It's such a great life philosophy, Stoicism. But one of the things that they talk about the most is just the fact that we only have control over ourselves, and how there is no point in trying to control anything else, because we'll never be able to. And as soon as you realize that the only thing you can control is your mind and your thoughts and how you respond, you really free yourself up, and it just makes your life better. But I know it's much easier said than done. But what I will say is that over the last few years, one of the main things that has, and this is one of the tools that we can use, but for me, the main thing that has changed this for me and has allowed me or enabled me to respond to things instead of react, is meditation. And I know that meditation has made a significant difference, because and you'll probably explain this much better than I could, but because it kind of balances your nervous system, it enables you to, when you're feeling, when you get into those situations, you're not so depleted, so you're more able to then respond instead of react. So I think meditation would be the very first thing that I would suggest people do, and or breath work. which I know you'll talk about too. But I do a combination of both, as do you. And yeah, it's just that is the thing that has allowed me to be so much calmer in general and really take on board the fact that we do not have control over anything else, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we react instead of respond, when we lose our shit, basically, that is because you are absolutely run ragged most of the
Yeah,
time. You have no capacity, you have no flexibility within your nervous system. You are probably, it's almost like, imagine a balloon which is just full to bursting, full, 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 and then it just takes one small instant and then
yeah,
it pops and it explodes. And actually what we want is a nervous system which is a bit of which is a balloon which has got a little bit of give to, and which you can actually, so that you can actually, when you have these stressful situations, there is room for it, for you to be able to kind of
yeah,
cope with it. And so yes, there are so many tools that you can do to help that with that nervous system flexibility. And yes, meditation and breath work are absolutely key, because what you're doing, particularly with breath work, first of all, is that what that's doing, you're in a very safe environment. You are building that capacity, building that flexibility within your nervous system, because you're training your nervous system to be put under stress in very safe conditions through different breath patterns, so that so that you kind of used to it, and it's just, you're always kind of growing, it's your edges are expanding. So that's what one thing you can do. And then obviously the meditation, what that does for me anyway, is that it buys you that time
yeah,
in between the thing happening and your reaction. And when you're at full capacity and you don't have any tools, then there is literally no time. It's literally like the reaction happens. But with meditation, I find that it's almost like time stands still for a moment. You suddenly realize you have a choice how you are going to respond to the situation. That's because you've trained your mind, you've trained yourself to become aware of your thoughts. And that's really so powerful. And I love it when you almost in slow motion go, you're about to explode. I do this quite a lot with my kids when there's, we've done something and it's really annoying. And particularly when I've kind of cleaned my kitchen surfaces for about 10 times in a day, and then I'll go into the kitchen and there's like grease all over the surface again. And it's like, but it's, and I could easily kind of shout, but actually it's like, okay, just, I'm not going to say that. I'll just keep banging my drum. Can you please wipe the surfaces? Because what's it going to achieve? It's not going to achieve anything by shouting
exactly.
and scream. But also, so those two tools are massive. But there's other tools you can do, again, just for building your resilience. Things like cold water plunging. Yes, gratitude. I've seen Alibong say here is another really lovely thing that you can do to kind of just put yourself into a state of, my airport situation, for example. It's like, okay, I'm just bloody fortunate to even be here. So that can really help change and your perspective on the situation.
Completely. And also, I think another quite useful thing to be mindful of in those kinds of situations, or any situation of stress, because I think, we live in such a sort of crazy, fast-paced world, and we, as you know, like, we're in fight or flight mode way more than we should be. We're just constantly in that sort of defensive fight or flight mode rather than the sort of rest and digest. And one thing that I find really helpful is to just think to myself, when I'm really stressing about something, I just say to myself, what is actually the worst that's going to happen here? Like, so if I miss my flight, so then what? Okay, so you know, so ultimately, it's almost like you have to think about things in terms of you're safe, you're well, you're okay, the people you love are safe and well and okay. So therefore, why am I freaking out? And I think it's just really important to remember, and certainly for me anyway, just asking myself, well, what is the worst that is going to happen here? You know,
Yeah.
I am down and I'm going to be late, then it's me sitting here stressing that I'm going to be late is not going to make me arrive any more composed than I would if I wasn't stressing. So I think that
Yes.
worth thinking about. And one thing actually that I find really interesting about myself since I've been meditating, which is for several years now, well, at least I would say consistently for the last couple of years. But what I've noticed is that because I kept up that kind of consistent practice of meditation slash breath work, it means that I more automatically choose to respond rather than react. So when you when you do these kind of practices consistently, it just becomes your sort of new normal. And whereas, and don't get me wrong, I lose my shit sometimes. Oh my god, I don't want to make out, oh yeah, I'm just like so chilled and so zen. No, I'm not. But compared to how I used to be, I'm a lot more chilled than I used to be. So yeah, I think it's really interesting looking at my own kind of journey that I've definitely find now that I will more automatically fall down on the side of responding rather than reacting, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and I think particularly, you know, when you've got a lot on your plate, you know, I'm the same. You know, don't get me wrong, I still have moments where I completely lose it, but they're just not as frequent.
Yeah,
But you know, when I'm navigating the whole perimenopause thing, and you know, kids and work, and you know, when we're all really busy and being pulled in every direction, I honestly felt that I was just reacting all of the time, and I was just, you know, it just makes you miserable. It just really makes you so miserable, and life feels really hard and stressy. And yeah, I mean, I and now it does take quite a lot for me to get really angsty. You know, I think it's probably mostly with my kids because they know how to push my buttons sometimes. But you know, that again, that's kind of almost like a reflection of what my triggers are with me. So it's always, I always think, actually, if something's triggering me, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Let's have a look. Why is
yeah,
that particular triggering me?
yeah,
Um, so that's another trick you can, you know, that's another tool that you can use if you are getting really triggered. Actually, it could potentially be a reflection of something within you that is feeling a little bit vulnerable, feeling unsafe. It's, I find it's kind of is a bit of a mirror of some of my own
yeah,
insecurities. So with those moments, it really is about like, oh, maybe that's sort of my inner child coming out, and can I send it a little bit of love, and you know, and that then allows you to have some sort of empathy for that other person, and that can really help you stop reacting. I think empathy and and compassion for the other person is a big one and can really help as well, particularly if someone or something, particularly if someone is really getting on your nerves, being able to almost see the situation from their
yeah.
perspective really helps.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, it's just made me think of something else that I wanted to mention, which is that when it comes to, you know, you were obviously thinking about your kids, but also I think one of the triggers in a lot of our lives are can tend to be people that we come into contact with as we go about our day. So somebody that we're, you know, standing in a queue behind, or somebody serves us in the supermarket or in the coffee shop. Those, because one thing that is such a waste of our energy is if so, for example, if somebody is like rude to you when, you know, you're getting coffee and the, you know, the barista is not very nice, or um some, you know, you kind of bump into somebody by mistake and they have a complete meltdown, and you know, those kinds of sort of day-to-day life situations where it's so easy to get triggered by random people who kind of come in and out of our days, people that we don't know. And the way that I always think of it is, if somebody is being really rude or not being particularly unpleasant, rather than, because there, you know, there is that tendency, say you're on your way to work and, you know, whatever happens with some, you know, just some random thing happens, and then you walk into the office and you're like, oh my god, this guy just did blah 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 blah, blah, and you kind of have a massive rant about it to your colleague, and they're like, oh, I know, yeah, this woman this morning was just such a blah 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 to me, and you know what I mean. It's so easy and almost so tempting to do that. It's so tempting to bang on about these little irritations that happen in our day. Or, I mean, I'm single, you're not. I'm sure, when you come, I mean, I remember in relationships, when I would come home, the first thing I'd want to do is like have a rant to my boyfriend about whatever it had been that might have happened today. But my point is that if we're allowing those tiny, tiny things from people we don't even know, if we're allowing those things to get to us, we are wasting so much energy. Not to mention, we are flooding our body with cortisol, which is really not good for us on any level. And, it's just a waste of energy. We're lowering our vibe, we're just not doing ourselves any good. So, what I was going to say though is when somebody is rude or short or whatever it is, I've now kind of trained myself to think, God, I hope they're okay. Because if someone is really unpleasant to you or really rude to you, don't get me wrong, I can be a fucking bitch if I want. If I'm in the wrong mood, I mean, I can, I'm, I have totally been rude to people unnecessarily, on the phone to like getting, internet sorted or whatever. So look, I'm not saying that I can't do these things myself. Of course I can. But when somebody is behaving a certain way, if you remind yourself that actually it's about them, it's not about you, I think that really
Yeah.
helps. And again, to sort of go, kind of send them some love and just, oh God, you're obviously having a really bad day or you're not in a good place. And that seems to be, for me anyway, quite a good way to deal with it and to prevent myself from being like, oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah, so good, so true, and yeah, ultimately we just want to make our lives as easy and as enjoyable and as carefree as possible. And these tools really do work. Lucy, we're gonna have to wrap this up because at 10 o'clock my time there is something called load shedding, which is organised power cuts because there's not enough power, and I just want to make sure I can post this
oh God,
whilst I've got
go.
Wi-Fi.
Listen, have an amazing rest of the time, and I'll see you when you get back.
Thank
Oh,
you so much. You too. I'll be back on
yeah,
at the
so
weekend.
see you next Monday as
Yeah.
in at 9.
Back
Cool.
to normal next Monday. We'll see you
Lots
then.
of love, Polly. Have a fab time.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Bye.
Bye.